Howdy folks, hope you're all having a good one, and welcome back to a game of throws in World of Warships. What the hell is that? Another new ship I've never heard of. Willem de Eerste, that's William I, Dutch battleship? Wow. It's like, I've given up trying to keep track anymore, but welcome to another episode of a game of throws here in World of Warships with Rear Admiral Jingles. This is Shash. I do not apologise. I did not come up with the name. I miss Dave, you know. Life was so much more simple when Dave was around. I haven't seen Dave in ages. But anyway, this is Shash in the Tier 10 Italian extremely heavy cruiser, the Venezia. And if you take a look at the minimap, yes, his surface detection range is greater than the range of his guns. He will be spotted on the surface. I don't know why we say that. Where else is he supposed to be spotted from? It's not like he's going to be spotted while at an altitude of 3,000 metres at a range of 17.6 kilometres. And his guns only have a range of 17.1. Well, actually 17.13, but nobody's counting the small change. This is quite deliberate, because the base detection range of the Venezia is kind of crap in the first place. But a while back, people figured out that on certain ships, and the French Tier 10 heavy cruiser, the Henry IV, is also a very, very good example where people do this sort of thing. They go for what's known as a lighthouse build, because obviously a lighthouse needs to be seen from as far away as possible. And the same is true of ships, and they're usually heavy cruisers that opt to go for this lighthouse build. They want to be seen from as far away as possible in order to take specific advantage of the top grade gunner commander skill, which buffs the reloads of your secondaries by 10%, which nobody really cares about in this case, but it also has the side effect of buffing the reload of your main gun batteries by 8% anytime an enemy ship is spotted within your surface detection range, which is particularly useful on a ship like the Venezia, which is essentially just a whole bunch of 8-inch guns with an engine attached, that all come with a horrific 21-second base reload. But with this skill, and a couple of other essential skills and modules, Shash here's got the reload down to 16 seconds. That's 15 8-inch guns with a 16-second reload. It also synergizes quite well with another special thing that's unique to the Venezia, and I'm talking about its legendary upgrade, which Shash has just popped. Its exhaust smoke generator upgrade, which reduces the cooldown to a mere 81 seconds. You still have to be careful how you use it, of course, because an exhaust smoke generator does not make you invisible. It just reduces the range at which you'll be spotted, and that depends entirely on the caliber of the guns that you are firing out of that smoke. And in the case of a heavy cruiser, like the Venezia here, with an enemy ship within 8 kilometres, you're going to get spotted. It might even be more than 8. But the simple solution to that, of course, is just to obliterate whoever it is that happens to be looking at you. Of course, the smoke had expired at the time that the enemy Castilla, who was the one spotting him through the smoke, ended up being knocked out by the friendly key. So under these specific circumstances, didn't really matter anyway. But the other thing that you're going to have to get used to doing in a ship like this with this kind of build, and it might seem a little boring, but it is 100% required for your survival, is keeping any visible enemies inside your surface detection range, which, let's face it, when your surface detection range covers half the map, is not particularly difficult, but it also requires keeping them as far away as possible, because you are basically going to be spotted the entire game, except for those occasions when you pop your exhaust smoke generator. You're going to have to stay angled against the biggest threats and keep them at maximum possible range in order to give you a chance of avoiding any incoming fire. And as long as the enemies shooting at you are more than 12 to 13 kilometres away, you're not going to be able to avoid every shot fired at you. And you're going to have a lot of shots fired at you. His potential damage is already up to 1.3 million. But with careful adjustment to your throttle and your rudder, you'd be surprised at exactly how many shots you can dodge, as long as you keep everybody at maximum range. Because unlike a lot of the ships, not all obviously, but unlike a lot of the ships that are going to be trying to hit you at this kind of range, like the Jean Bart over there, which is a very, very good battleship, and you absolutely do not want to get hit by it. But the Venezia's 15 8-inch guns, with both the armour-piercing and the semi-armour-piercing shells, have absolutely excellent long-range ballistics with extremely high shell velocity and flat firing arcs, which makes it a lot easier for you to hit them than it is for them to hit you. There goes the exhaust smoke generator again. Unbelievably, he was the one spotting the Jean Bart. Seriously? Alright, fine. Plenty of other targets. Remember, with the legendary upgrade on the Venezia, this thing only has an 81-second cooldown. And since a couple of well-placed semi-armour piercing salvos successfully drove off the enemy Johnston, there's nobody close enough to spot him through the smoke. Now, despite having broadside targets to shoot at, you're not going to see him switch to armour piercing very often. Remember, it's an Italian cruiser, so its ammunition choices are limited to semi-armour piercing and armour piercing. It doesn't get high explosive. And that's because, well, it's down to two reasons. One, the semi-armour piercing is very, very good. Remember, the semi-armour piercing is basically high explosive that can't start fires but has increased penetration. And it is highly effective at basically everything, with the possible exception of destroyers. Well, it's not as good as high explosive against destroyers, but it's no worse than anything else, and it's certainly good enough to finish off the USS Johnston and score Shash his first kill. But the semi-armour piercing is very, very good. It's almost like a no-brain button, kind of in the same way that the high explosive ammunition is on the high-tier Royal Navy battleships like HMS Lion and HMS Conqueror. There are circumstances where the armour piercing is actually going to be the best choice. But on those ships, if you just keep firing high explosive at everything, it's really not going to matter that much. Because the high explosive is so amazingly good. And that's kind of the case here on the Venezia. And not just the Venezia, honestly, Italian semi-armour piercing is just very, very good across the board. And Italian armour piercing is not. The only real problem with the semi-armour piercing ammunition is that they do lose a lot of effectiveness if they can't penetrate, or if they hit areas that have been damage saturated. But because they have increased penetration over high explosive ammunition, while not having the same penetration as armour piercing, there's not a lot that they can't penetrate. So you're going to do reliable and consistent chunk damage even against battleships, at least until the battleship starts to become damage saturated. They also don't have the one really annoying problem that you can have with armour-piercing shells that do have sufficient penetration. In fact, too much penetration. Semi-armour-piercing can never over-penetrate, which can be a problem with armour-piercing. Although, to be strictly fair, it's never really going to be a problem with Italian armour-piercing, because Italian armour-piercing is so bad. That's not to say that Shash is never going to load the armour-piercing, as in the high-explosive spamming British battleships like the Lion and the Conqueror. If you know when to switch to the armour-piercing rather than just spamming high-explosive everything, you will be rewarded and you will do better than if you simply spam high-explosive at absolutely everything. But with the Venezia, I mean, your mileage may vary, but in my experience, you basically need the perfect storm of circumstances to make it worth switching to the armour-piercing in this thing. You have to have a target that is basically at a 90-degree flat broadside angle to you, with all of your guns loaded with armour-piercing, and they really do need to be no more than 8 kilometres away. Anything other than the most perfect ideal circumstances, and you're just asking to get 15 shatters and over-penetrations and no citadels. I fail to understand how it's possible to unload 15 8-inch armour-piercing shells at the same target and get nothing but shatters, which are failures to penetrate, and over-penetrations, which are too much penetration in the same salvo. But that's just what happens when you load the armour-piercing in the Venezia. And I'm fine with that, because it just removes the thinking from the equation. In all but the most perfect, ideal armour-piercing circumstances, just load semi-armour-piercing and forget about it. It just takes all of the effort out of the decision-making. It's kind of like playing British light cruisers. because they only have armor piercing. They don't have semi-armor piercing. They don't have high explosive. They have no ammunition choice. Armor piercing is all they get. So you don't even need to worry about it. It's almost like that with the Venezia. Almost. But not quite. How are we doing for the scores anyway? Hang on a minute, Jingles. I thought this was an episode of a Game of Throws. Both teams are reasonably even. Both teams have 2 caps. The enemy team are 1 kill ahead, but it's not that bad. They're a little bit more than 100 points ahead. Ah, okay. They're now more than 200 points ahead. We just lost the William I. No, wait. The William I just got the Flesh Wound Award. His airstrike finished off the Vermont. So they're about 100. There's only about 150 points in it, and both teams have 2 caps. The enemy team is still only the 1 kill ahead. How does this qualify as a Game of Throws? Patience, Padawan. All will be revealed. Trust me, you're not going to have to wait too long to find out. Shash is now up to 2.1 million potential damage, which is pretty impressive. That's the lighthouse build for you. For the benefit of those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, maybe just don't play World of Warships, or don't play it enough to understand every single game mechanic. As the Mets opens up on him and scores some damage and pushes that potential damage up to 2.3 million. Potential damage is the amount of damage that you would have taken if everything fired at you had actually hit. That's a lot of damage. There goes the high-speed smoke. And of course it is a high-speed smoke. It's not like the crawling or static smoke screen generators that everybody else gets. You do not need to slow down in this thing. But 8-inch guns, the smoke firing penalty is substantial. So he can take a shot at the Mets here, but he will be spotted, so he needs to time it so that the Mets cannot fire back. There it is. Yep, more or less perfect. Oh, there's the Confederate Award, which means the main battery reload time is now even further reduced. He's obviously running Luigi Sansonetti as the captain of his Venezia. Luigi Sansonetti without the concealment expert skill. Bold choice, because it means he basically can't use them on any other of his premium Italian ships unless they're also running the lighthouse build. Hey, there's the kill. There goes the Mets. Oh, the double strike! He took out he took out the salmon as well. And yet, despite this, they're still losing. And the Mets managed to get a salvo off and hurt him substantially before he took the Mets out. The enemy team have 3 of the cap circles. The kills are even, but they're 200 points behind. What's worse, though, is that the enemy team, with 3 cap circles, are less than 125 points away from winning, which means that the time to sit at maximum range, using your rudder and your throttle to make course changes to avoid long-range return fire while farming semi-armor piercing salvos off the enemy team, is long gone. And even though the Venezia is 100% really absolutely not suited for it, you need to get in there and sink ships. That'll do, because the enemy team are at 918 points. There goes the Alvaro de Bazan. They're now back down to a mere 901. I mean, you know, they're still 150 points up. They're still less than 100 points away from winning. And they still have 3 compared to Shash's team's 1 cap circle, but it's a start. If that submarine over there could avoid getting killed, that would be lovely, because the enemy team are once again back up to 925 points, despite Shash's team being 1 kill ahead. And of course, the really bad news here is that the enemy team now consists of 1 heavy cruiser, which shouldn't be too difficult to spot, but it also consists of 2 destroyers. And they're up to 941 points. So all the destroyers have to do is run and hide. But the Akazuki chose violence. There's the Kraken unleashed. He got his torpedoes away though. And it's not quite the torpedo beat. But Shash does only take the 1. The enemy team were at 945 points when he killed the Akazuki. He momentarily dropped them down to 920, but the salmon managed to get his ass killed, so the enemy team are back up to 984 points, 16 away from winning. But the Harugamo, while on 454 hit points, also chose violence, which means the enemy team are now down to a mere 967 points, only 23 away from winning. And yep, do not adjust your monitors. Shash did just switch to the armor piercing which was a critical choice at exactly the right time because he got 4 citadels on the Azima. And as the Azima opens up with its extremely large caliber high explosive, with the enemy team 17 points away from winning, Shash could really use some help here, because if he dies, the Azima win. Thank you. There it is. The Azimo scores his first kill of the game, with the Azima 9 points away from winning, with Shash on slightly more than 2,000 hit points with a fire, a hair's breadth away from the Azima reloading, killing him and reaching 1,000 points and winning the battle. That was a 2,668 base XP 6-kill game for Shash in the Italian Tier 10 heavy cruiser, the Venezia. Another classic throw where all the enemy team had to do to win was nothing. And with the exception of the Azima, who at least had the "I'm a very, very big supercruiser and horrible at stealth" excuse, doing nothing was the simplest and easiest thing that they could have done, but instead they all chose violence. And as a result of which, they ended up starring on today's episode of A Game of Throws. Hope you all enjoyed it, and as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.